There are three sets of rules: EC, AETR, which are used for journeys to certain non-EC countries, and UK domestic rules. EC rules apply to drivers of most vehicles used for the carriage of goods, where the maximum permissible weight of the vehicle, including that of any trailer or semi-trailer, exceeds 3.5 tonnes on journeys made entirely in the UK and EC. There are exemptions from these regulations which depend upon the type of vehicle or work that's being done. Your VOSA local area office should be able to assist you with these. EC rules also apply to passenger-carrying vehicles, which are constructed to carry more than 9 passengers, including the driver. However, they do not apply to passenger vehicles on regular services where the route does not exceed 50 kilometres. They also don't apply to passenger vehicles with 17 seats or less, used exclusively for the non-commercial carriage of passengers. AETR rules are used for journeys to or through any of the following countries: Albania, Andorra, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Kazakhstan, Liechtenstein, Macedonia, Moldova, Norway, Russia, Switzerland, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, and Serbia and Montenegro. The rules will apply to the whole journey, including any EC countries that are passed through. Any vehicles that are exempt from EC or AETR are covered by UK domestic rules when operating in the UK. Let's start with the EC rules, which apply to both goods vehicle and public service vehicle drivers. A driver may drive for a maximum period of 4.5 hours before he must take a break. The maximum amount of driving that can be done in any one day is 9 hours. This can be increased to 10 hours, but only twice in a week. A week is defined as the period between 0 hours Monday to 2400 hours on the following Sunday. There's a limit to the amount of driving that's allowed in 1 week, which is set at 56 hours. There's also a limit of 90 hours set for driving during any 2 consecutive weeks. For example, if a driver does the maximum hours in 1 week, he'll have driven for 56 hours. This means the following week he may only drive up to 34 hours. But because the definition is any 2 consecutive weeks, he can only have driven up to 34 hours during the previous week. Remember, the rule is 90 hours in any 2 consecutive weeks. A fortnight is defined as any 2-week period commencing at 0 hours on a Monday and ending on 2400 hours on the Sunday, 14 days later. A driver may drive for a maximum of 4.5 hours before he must take a 45-minute break. A break is defined as any period during which a driver may not carry out any driving or any other work, and which is used exclusively for recuperation. He may split this break if he wishes into 2 periods. The first must be a break of at least 15 minutes, and the second must be a break of at least 30 minutes. Once the 45-minute break has been completed, whether in 1 or 2 periods, the driver will have wiped the slate clean and a new driving period begins. Periods of less than 15 minutes cannot be counted. If a journey is made entirely or even in part on the public road, then all the time spent driving on that journey must be recorded as driving time, including the off-road elements. For entirely off-road, then the driver may note this on the reverse of the chart or use the out-of-scope function on a digital tachograph. A driver must have 11 hours daily rest in a 24-hour period from when his day commences. A rest is defined as any uninterrupted period during which a driver may freely dispose of his time. He's allowed to reduce this rest to a minimum of 9 hours, but no more than 3 times between his weekly rest periods. A driver may wish to split his daily rest period, and so the total daily rest for the day increases to 12 hours. This daily rest period can only be split into 2 periods throughout the day. The first period must be uninterrupted for at least 3 hours, and the second at least 9 hours, making a total of 12 hours. When a driver is accompanying a vehicle that's on a ferry or train, his daily rest may be interrupted no more than twice by other activities, as long as the total interruption doesn't exceed 1 hour. The driver must have a full 11-hour rest, regardless of any interruptions made. It's not possible to reduce daily rest to 9 hours under these circumstances. Also, he must have access to a bunk or couchette for all parts of his daily rest period. In all cases, the rest period must be completed within the 24-hour period measured from the beginning of the driver's duty. Vehicles may be multi-manned. The advantage to an operator of having 2 drivers is that each driver can increase their duty time to 21 hours. This must then be followed by a 9-hour daily rest period and makes up a 30-hour day. But a minimum of 9 hours daily rest must also precede it. Remember, the 21 hours is duty time, not driving time. One driver may work alone for the first hour of a multi-man shift. This makes it possible to collect the second driver en route as long as this is within the first hour. For the rest of the shift, however, there must be 2 drivers present on the vehicle whenever it is moving. The second driver cannot be dropped off on the way back unless another driver takes his place. When there are 2 drivers in the cab, one driver may record a break whilst the other is driving, but the vehicle must be stationary for them to take their daily rest. No more than 6 24-hour periods after finishing a weekly rest period, a driver must start another one. In any 2 consecutive weeks, a driver must take at least 1 regular weekly rest period of at least 45 hours. The other weekly rest period that he's required to take during the rolling 2 weeks can be reduced to a minimum of 24 hours. When taking a reduced weekly rest period, any time must be compensated back. This amount of time must be paid back en bloc, all in one go, and attached to another daily or weekly rest period of at least 9 hours. Any reductions in weekly rest must be paid back by the end of the 3rd week following the week in which the reduction occurred. In the vehicle, a driver taking a reduced weekly rest period of less than 45 hours can do so provided that there are suitable sleeping facilities and that the vehicle is stationary. He may not take a regular 45-hour weekly rest period in the vehicle. If a driver takes his vehicle home, it does count towards his driving time. He must make sure that he keeps the same tachograph chart or digital card in to record his journey time. Now on to the rules concerning AETR journeys. Remember, AETR rules are used when making international journeys to certain non-EC countries, which were listed at the beginning of the programme. A driver may drive for a maximum period of 4.5 hours before he must take a break. The daily driving limit is 9 hours, which may be increased to 10 hours twice a week. Any time spent driving off-road doesn't count towards driving time, but should be recorded as other work. There is no limit set in legislation with regard to weekly driving, but as daily driving is limited, the maximum any driver could do in a week is 56 hours. The fortnightly driving limit is 90 hours. A driver must take a break of at least 45 minutes after 4.5 hours of cumulative or continuous driving. Breaks must be for a minimum of 15 minutes. Drivers can choose how to make up the full 45-minute break period. For example, 3 breaks of 15 minutes each, or 1 break of 25 minutes and 1 break of 20 minutes. In each 24-hour period, there's a minimum daily rest period of 11 consecutive hours. This period may be reduced to 9 hours no more than 3 times in a week. If the daily rest period is reduced, this time must be compensated back by an equivalent rest before the end of the following week. Alternatively, the daily rest period may be spread over the 24-hour period. It may be taken in 2 or 3 periods, but must total 12 hours rest overall. These periods must be a minimum of 1 hour in length, and the final period being a minimum of 8 consecutive hours. If a vehicle covers part of its journey on a ferry or train, then the daily rest period may be interrupted, but only once, and if it is, then 2 hours must be added to the total rest. If the rest is split up, then one part must be taken on land, either before or after the journey, with the other part taken on the boat or train. Any interruption in rest must be as short as possible and no more than 1 hour in length. This time must include customs formalities. During both parts of the rest period, the driver must have access to a bunk or couchette. Any time spent on a ferry or train which is not treated as daily rest can be treated as a break. When 2 or more drivers continuously man the vehicle, each driver must have 8 hours daily rest in a 30-hour period. Both drivers must be present on the vehicle when it is being driven, and the vehicle must be stationary when recording daily rest. After 6 days or 6 daily driving periods, the daily rest period is extended to make a weekly rest period. Normally, a weekly rest period will be at least 45 consecutive hours. The weekly rest period can be reduced to a minimum of 36 consecutive hours if taken either where the vehicle is normally based or where the driver is based. If it's taken elsewhere, the rest period can be reduced to a minimum of 24 consecutive hours. Each reduction must be compensated, made up by an equal period of rest attached to a weekly or daily rest period, and taken all in one continuous period before the end of the 3rd week following the week in which the reduction occurred. A weekly rest period may be postponed until the end of the 6th day if the total driving time over the 6 days doesn't exceed the maximum corresponding to 6 daily driving periods, which is 56 hours. Drivers of passenger-carrying vehicles on international journeys that are subject to AETR may postpone their weekly rest until the end of the 12th daily driving period or the end of the 12th day, provided that their driving doesn't exceed the amount allowable in 12 driving periods. Drivers who do this must then take 2 weekly rest periods back-to-back. It's expected that the AETR rules will be aligned with those of the EC rules in the near future. On to UK domestic hours rules, which apply to drivers of goods vehicles. Duty time is limited to 11 hours a day, and actual driving time must not exceed 10 hours in a day. Written records of hours of work must be kept, for example, a logbook or tachograph record. For drivers of passenger vehicles, coaches and buses, the rules are different. Driving time is limited to 10 hours on any working day, and shift time is limited to no more than 16 hours in a 24-hour period. A driver must take a 30-minute break when he reaches 5.5 hours of cumulative or continuous driving, or a total of 45 minutes break within any period of 8.5 hours. If the driver isn't going home at the end of this period, he must have another 30-minute break before he continues. When it comes to daily rest periods, a driver must have a continuous 10 hours of rest between 2 working days. This may be reduced to 8.5 hours rest, up to 3 times a week. Drivers are also subject to fortnightly rest periods. This means that in any 2 weeks in a row, there must be at least one period of 24 hours off. Remember, a week runs from Monday to Sunday. Now let's look at tachographs and record keeping. A driver must inform his employer of any work for another employer, whether within or outside of the transport sector, as this may have an impact on his daily or weekly rest periods. The driver has a duty to ensure that he has enough free time every day and every week to take daily and weekly rest. In the vehicle, the driver must remember to operate the mode switch to record breaks, rest, other work, and any periods of availability, because the tachograph only records driving automatically. An analog tachograph should not be opened during the working day without a valid reason. If it is, this should be noted on the chart while the tachograph is open. When there are two drivers, the one that is actually driving must make sure that his tachograph chart is on the top. When the other driver takes over, they must change tachographs, so the one that belongs to the current driver is always on top. If using a digital card, then the driver's card must be inserted into slot 1 and the co-driver's card into slot 2. These cards must then be changed over when the drivers do. If a driver can't fit his full name on the front of the tachograph chart, it's recommended that he writes his initial and surname on the front and then writes his full name on the reverse. On the road, the driver is responsible for ensuring he has his charts with him for the current week and any charts for the previous 15 calendar days. This will change on the 1st of January 2008 to the current record and any records for the previous 28 calendar days. He must also carry his digital smart card, as well as any manual records and printouts that he may have made during this period. Drivers on AETR journeys will need to produce any records, analogue, digital or manual, for the current week and the last record from the previous week in which they drove. UK drivers on journeys with a time zone change must leave the analogue tachograph clock set for UK time. The clock must never be adjusted during the shift, only at the start or finish. The internal clocks of digital tachographs are set to UTC time, Universal Time Coordinated, but it is still possible to display the local time on the screen. If the recording equipment breaks down, then the driver must keep a manual record of his day. The fault must be reported to the operator as soon as possible. If the vehicle is away from base and unlikely to return within the next 7 days, then it must be fixed en route. In an emergency, a driver is permitted to breach the rules to reach the first suitable stopping place. He cannot automatically return to base. As soon as he reaches that stopping place, the driver must make a manual record to indicate the reasons and circumstances. Emergencies are defined as unforeseen circumstances and therefore cannot be worked into a driver's schedule. For example, delays caused by roadworks known about in advance would not be classed as unforeseen. VOSA traffic enforcement officers have a wide range of powers, allowing them to inspect and copy records, both analogue and digital. Officers also have powers to examine other records, for example, fuel receipts and delivery paperwork. They have powers to inspect and remove tachograph equipment and suspect devices. VOSA have specially trained officers who have the power to stop and direct a vehicle. Officers can also weigh vehicles, take personal details, issue prohibitions to drivers, and are empowered to enter premises to inspect facilities or records. There are many areas that an operator should monitor. These include tachograph equipment, speed limiters, driver's hours and working time records, driver contracts, licensing and training, plating and testing, insurance, vehicle excise duty, load weights, compliance checks, vehicle condition and maintenance, and operator licensing. Operators must comply with EC and domestic regulations on driver's hours, driver's licenses, and operator licensing. They must also maintain equipment in working order and keep documentation relating to both drivers and vehicles. Documents and records relate to not only analogue charts and digital records for driver's hours purposes, but also include vehicle and driver licensing related documents and records such as MOT certificates. The traffic commissioners have the power to revoke, suspend, or curtail the operator's licence if they don't comply with the requirements of the licensing system. If a company continues to use a vehicle when the operator's licence has been revoked, the vehicle and any goods in it could be impounded and the assets may be lost. Holding an operator's licence means having a working system in place to ensure that the drivers keep to the hours and record-keeping rules and that the vehicles will be maintained properly and used within the weight limits. Operators must work to ensure that their drivers are keeping within the law and are obliged to organise their drivers' work within the legislation. They must not give drivers payments, such as bonuses, related to distance travelled or the amount of goods carried, if they encourage breaking the rules. Breaches of the regulations will result in prosecutions of drivers and operators, and in some circumstances, also the shipper, freight forwarder, tour operator, or any other party to the contract. The best method of ensuring compliance is for the employer to check a selection of tachograph charts from drivers on a periodic basis. This may be done by an outside agency. If drivers are using logbooks or record sheets for UK domestic hours, the operator is expected to check and sign them each week. Analogue charts, manual records, digital printouts and downloaded data must be kept by the operator for a minimum of 1 year. This increases to 2 years if the records are also being used as the only proof of compliance with the Road Transport Working Time Regulations 2005.
Morning, Carly.
Morning.
Digital smart cards hold approximately 28 days' worth of driver information. These cards are to be downloaded on a regular basis by the operator. The operator should also download data from the individual vehicle units on a periodic basis. Driver fatigue is an extremely serious matter. A tired driver can kill, which is why these rules exist. If a driver breaks the law, then the responsibility lies with him and he will be prosecuted. But it is a dual responsibility, as operators should educate their drivers and ensure that their activities are monitored. VOSA's principal aim is to improve road safety. It has an educational advisory role to help and advise operators and drivers who are unclear about the complexity of the regulations. VOSA's examiners throughout the country are happy to offer help and advice. We will now return to the main menu, where you can access information about publications or see a page where there is information on websites and telephone contacts.